Okay, circles.
So we look at the first question about issues about evaluation and what sorts of methods you might use and so forth. And we talked about the challenges that were involved in a combination of methods: interviews, questionnaires, observations, tracking and logging users by giving them devices as they walked around and watching where they held the devices up against, collecting data about where they held the device up against tags on objects. We talked about then also collecting audio and video information as they walk through. And one of the challenges we had with all this data is the methods of analysis for this. And we think that one of the recommendations we go on to make later is that you actually need a wider range of much more sophisticated evaluation techniques than we currently use, and much more computationally based methods, instead of doing it all by hand coding and small discrete analysis. So we also want to push the sophistication of the analytics that's done, in particular when you're collecting quantitative data sets, statements from people, interviews, so that you can automate their coding and use text mining to pull key themes out and make cross comparisons and so forth. Another problem that we had, which we come on to in the second stage, is the question about cross-institutional comparative approaches. That, hey, you're all looking at who's coming to visit, you're all looking at who's using your websites and what kind of searches they're doing, but you're not collecting data in a comparative way and sharing it so that you can look cross-institutionally at the outcomes, except maybe in some discrete projects. And one of the issues that we were also very interested in is the problem about the retrospective construction of memories of visits. So visitors come, they go around and they do the tour, and then you talk to them you interview them, and they actually reconstruct the memory of what their visit was like, as opposed to telling you exactly. And how do you differentiate and how do you work through those processes to get pure, clean data and senses and description of experience? But really what we were, some of the bigger questions that we looked at in terms of evaluation was there's the conflict between qualitative and quantitative data. And we don't actually believe that that's a conflict. We actually believe we have to find a way to make them work more effectively together and to smooth the curves between them and look at the interdependence of those particular methods. We were concerned about the representativeness of the data samples that we're collecting, both in terms of visitors, but also in terms of non-visitors. We don't often collect that. Analytic methods, and the fact that in terms of selection and use of methods, many of our colleagues really only use a very narrow set of methodological techniques, and we need to expand the set of methodological techniques we use, which really means that we need to better educate the folks who are doing evaluations in museums to give them the skills to do that. But fundamentally, the real question that we had in this section about evaluation was that we really need to press institutions think about what the strategic mandate of the institution is, what the strategic mandate of that special exhibition is, when they're planning and designing the evaluation, so that they actually do the evaluation against a mandate as opposed to against some generic ideas about collecting data in terms of an evaluation that it'd be nice to know these things. Well, how does it actually relate to your strategic mandate? So one of the things that you really want to be doing then is creating information that allows you to measure impact. And impact isn't always through footfall. And you want to be able to be collecting information that allows you to be able to collect headline stories, things that convince funders, convince policymakers that what's happening in your institution and the kinds of experiences folks are having really are making a difference. So then we turn very briefly to the policy side of this. You can see that we use most of our time in the first section. So going back to what I said about increasing the number of analytic methods, we agree that we need more focus on the agility of method application. We need to be much more agile in how we do that. We don't use most of the data that is collected in the heritage sector, and there were some examples given around the table that about data going back 50, 60 years that's not used for longitudinal studies. But we also don't share data between institutions, and maybe we need an evaluation repository somewhere where we can collect and share data on a cross-institutional basis. We did talk about the question about the value of standardization, and time runs against me, so I'm not going to try and explain in exact detail what we talked about was, but we see some value in standardization, but we actually believe there might be computational mechanisms for you to compensate for working with non-standard data sets. And we should be evaluating and considering how those might work and how we might actually apply them. But it all depends on us building a comprehensive set of data that we share across institutions that we can do that. And the last point was, how can we use the types of analytic and recommender technologies that are used in the commercial sector within the cultural sector to improve both our processing of data, but also extracting the value from it in terms of helping our visitors to improve their experience. Now, the very interesting thing about all this evaluation that I only think of as I come to the end of this is that this is all about evaluation that we do after the visit to inform future visitor experiences, or to justify why we've done certain things to funders, or to say, hey, we did a great job. None of this is actually about instantaneous evaluation to improve the visitor experience while the visitor's there. And a lot of the techniques and the methods that we actually are using, we ought to be able to feed into automatic feedback, observing that some visitors look absolutely bored when they're visiting, having collected enough information about them to all of a sudden change a label through digital interactive labels to brighten up the visitor's day by collecting 2 or 3 pieces that they've already seen and telling them a new story that they didn't expect to get at the next waypoint that they come along to in the museum. So there's evaluation for long-term value, but also there's the possibility of thinking about evaluation for near-term experience improvement. Okay? Does anyone have anything to add? Okay? Great.